There's nothing in the world at all wrong with sex as long as it's practiced in love, no matter who it's with, or what age, or what relative, or what manner. This is a quote from a man that created one of the most vile and disgusting sex cults America, and in fact the world, has ever seen. A cult that encouraged incestual sex with children of any age. In 1968, preacher David Brandt Berg founded a group called Teens for Christ, which at first consisted of young runaways and hippies that were so-called born again. Over time, the church would become known as the Children of God, and at its peak had over 150,000 members around the world. At the height of its popularity, it had members such as River and Joaquin Phoenix, McGowan and Jeremy Spencer, who was a founding member of Fleetwood Mac that would leave the band in 1971 to join this specific cult. To kind of understand the psyche of this founder, we have to look at his childhood and his horrible parents. Now, Berg was born in 1919. He was the youngest of three, and his father was a Swedish-American pastor who had a strong influence on David's religious upbringing. His mother, Virginia, was a prominent evangelist who was known for faith healing and travelled the country preaching. She preached a lot about fire and brimstone and pain and horror and all that kind of God-fearing bullshit. She also apparently was bedridden for 5 years after being whipped off by a horse, breaking her back, and one day rose from the dead, just like Jesus, basically. And she earned the name Miracle Woman, telling everyone about her divine healing powers. But of course, it was total bullshit. I mean, who would have thought that? You know, those type of people who use tongue languages and banish demons out of you and cure you of illnesses. That's the kind of shit that she was getting up to. It was real theatre. But one of the most damaging cases for Dave in his youth was when his mother threatened to cut his dick off in front of his whole family if he didn't stop touching himself. And one time when caught in mid-stroke, his mother made his father come in, and he was made finish in front of both his mother and his father. And this kind of normalised sexual behaviour as a young child kind of helped him normalise a lot of the sexual barriers that other people would have, because it kind of turned him into this really disgusting sexual deviant as he got older. It kind of explains why he ended up creating such a prolific sex cult in his later years. And he never got on well with the leadership in different Christian groups as he was growing up throughout his life. And this kind of forced him to create his own path and kind of move away from traditional practices that he was used to with his family. So in 1969, he moved the new group from the coffee house in Huntington Beach in Orange County, California, because he had this revelation that a big earthquake was coming to California. Now, did that earthquake come? No. They set up colonies at a Texas ranch and a Los Angeles Skid Row mission owned by a radio TV minister by the name of Fred Jordan, and dozens of communes followed in North America and overseas over time. Now, in its beginnings, it began to spread messages of salvation, the apocalypse, and like many religious cults, had a distrust of the outside world, and was labelled by members of the cult as the system. And to be honest, like, its ideology isn't exactly that original either. They share the same sentiments that a lot of other religious cults that I've covered on the channel do. That, you know, Antichrist is coming, there's a one world government being set up, and Jesus was coming back in the second coming to overthrow this one government and like rule the world. And of course, just like all cults, especially religious cults, there is a history of sexual abuse, especially to the children. And it always boggles my mind, like, why do these religious psychos insist that they are messengers of God, but then they rape children? Where in the Bible does Jesus tell people to do such vile and disgusting acts? It's deplorable, unforgivable behaviour. They would essentially take to the streets and try to convert people into their cult and distribute pamphlets. Again, very similar to other cults. Leaders within the Children of God were referred to as the Chain, and members of the Children of God founded communes, which would later be called colonies, and then nowadays are referred to as homes. During his tenure as leader of the group, David would send nearly 3,000 letters to his members over his 24-year period, and they were referred to as the Mo letters. These teachings he rambled were strange to say the least. He predicted a comet called Kordek would doom America, which was a comet that would be near Earth in the 1970s. He said a pyramid-shaped city was inside the moon. And he also claimed to be guided by the spirits of Rasputin, Martin Luther, and the Pied Piper. Like, Jesus Christ, like, how do people like this gain popularity? It just boggles my mind. In the early 1970s, members of the sect dressed in sackcloth and conducted demonstrations denouncing America's abandonment of God. And again, a various amount of cults have had that, especially in America, that Americans have abandoned God and God will punish them. Now, one of the most controversial things they did, and there was a lot of controversial things that this cult did, but one of the most controversial was a thing by the name of Flirty Fishing. So this was started in 1976 as an attempt to entice more members into the cult. He would use sex to show God's love and mercy, and as a result, according to their own records, over 223,000 people were fished out and over 10,000 babies were conceived through cult women from around the year 1971 to 2001. And hilariously enough, one of the reasons why they eventually stopped doing this was because, for two reasons. One was because herpes was rampant throughout the whole cult because they were all banging each other and nobody was wearing protection. But then also in the late 80s, when the AIDS epidemic began, they got concerned, so they at that point decided to actually cut back on doing so. And like, women of the cult were forced to do this whether or not they wanted to or not. It was so ingrained in their doctrine to do so was to spread God's love. So it was a mental manipulation of these women to make them use their bodies to sell God, basically. They would also target people with political power to curry political favour in whatever state they were living in. And then these fathers would then obviously, of course, support the women. And as a result, the cult would get more money into it and also have connections to people with power, which gave them power. But in my opinion, it was just effectively prostitution. The reason why he pushed this ideology of flirty fishing was from his interpretation of the New Testament in Matthew chapter 4 verse 19, where Jesus tells two fishermen that he will make them fishers of men. And he interpreted that as using women as bait and having men as the fish to spread God's message and to get people in the cult. It's an amazing amount of mental gymnastics that he used to get to that conclusion. David, of course, was the leader, often referred to as Moses David. His teachings were seen as revelations and direct messages from God that you cannot question, that were doctrine. Next up was his wife, of course, Maria Berg, who was the queen and the prophetess according to him, and she was seen as the spiritual guide and decision maker on behalf of the cult. They also have the council or the leadership team, which consists of high ranking members who help direct the organization's activities, teachings and administration, and people in the cult actually refer to them as royal family. They also then have regional leaders who oversee large geographical areas, implement directives from the top leadership and ensure local groups adhere to the organization's teachings. Then you have your local leaders who basically run the homes or the communes, and then you have the full-time members who dedicate their lives to the cult. Now, like all religious cults, there was of course countless abuse allegations against them over the years, and the most deplorable one was of course all the allegations made against children. Sex with children was literally part of their indoctrination. It's not like any other cult where like people that are in these cults would use their power to abuse kids, which is very common of course, but it was never really included in the doctrine. It was kind of something that happened on the side. In this case, it was like openly talked about and seen as a positive thing to do. Whether you wanted to do it or not, you were literally encouraged to like have sexual relations with your kids, with family members from the age of 5 years old upwards. It's disgusting. Like, former members have actually claimed that a lot of these practices could start as young as 2 or 3 years old. He also suggested that parents masturbate their young boys at bedtime and instructed female followers on how to lure men into the group, like by teasing, flirting, and then screwing them until he drops over. One of the victims of the cult by the name of John Treadwell, who left the group in 1978, claims that Berg, who was her grandfather, started having sex with her, not through penetration, but everything else when she was 5 years old, which is disgusting behaviour. Now, his wife, Zerby, participated in alleged sexual abuse of her son Ricky alongside David Berg, who was the stepfather of Ricky, from the time he was 18 months old. Berg believed that the Antichrist would be defeated by two prophets, and he believed that one of them was his wife and the other was his stepson, little Ricky. The two would apparently kill the Antichrist, and Ricky was effectively believed to be the new Messiah. He was also sexually abused by a lot of other women in the cult throughout his life before leaving the cult in 1999. There's a book that was written with over 762 pages about Ricky's life, which is actually probably the longest, most detailed piece of archival evidence of any cult in history of cults, and it basically goes through the horror of Ricky's life, but it was actually written as a guide to help the next generations to explain how they should treat their own children in the future. When the book was published in 1983, members of the cult believed Ricky was the new Messiah. In January 2005, Ricky murdered a former group member by the name of Angela Smith, who was a nanny who was part of the abuses that went on as he grew up. Hours later, Rodriguez committed suicide. In a video the night before, he said he saw himself as a vigilante, avenging children like him and his sisters who have been subjected to rapes and beatings for years. Why does every religious cult do this to their children? And how can they claim to be Christians, to be followers of Christ and his teachings, and yet at the same time commit such horrific, deplorable, disgusting behavior? And it's always the goddamn religious cults that do this shit. But one thing you were not allowed to do was to question the cult belief systems that were in place. Members who questioned the group were often isolated from others to prevent their doubts from spreading. Members who continued to question could be separated from their family, and in some cases, although rare, members could be banned from the cult. Although this didn't really happen because they didn't really want to lose any members. If they could maintain as much as possible, that would be the best outcome. And there was also an atmosphere of distrust among members because some would report on them if anyone shared opinions that were different to that of the cult or the cult's teachings. So a lot of people just stayed quiet out of fear, which is a really clever psychological tactic used by the cult to maintain its members and maintain the power they have over them. And of course the members were gaslit into believing the outside world was evil and they didn't need it, and in fact they couldn't survive if they left. Despite the level of abuse that was going on, they also taught about the end of the world and how they would be saved, which again is typical ideology cult bullshit. A woman by the name of Flor Edwards, who grew up in a cult in Thailand, shared some of the horrific abuse that she was inflicted growing up there. And like as a child, she was forced to believe that David was God's prophet. She claimed that she never actually saw him or knew what he looked like, and that he was portrayed as like a giant, cuddly, lion-headed figure whom she was supposed to love unconditionally. Loving Jesus is a term to describe their intimate sexual relationship with Jesus. And I think that kind of, I don't really need to go into that. That kind of speaks for itself, really. We know how fucked that is. Of course, like many other cults, money was essential, and members who were good at raising money and handing out pamphlets were called shiners, and members who couldn't were known as shamers. And if you missed out on your quota, you mightn't be allowed to come home for dinner that day. In the 1990s, the group stopped a lot of their weird, disgusting sexual practices. Homes of family members in several countries were raided by different government agencies that were concerned about child welfare. But after extensive investigations, there was no cases of abuse. Now, after Burge's death in October 1994, Zerbe assumed leadership of the group. In February 1995, the group introduced the Love Charter, which defined the rights and responsibilities for charter members and homes. The charter also included the fundamental family rules, a summary of rules, and guidelines from the past publications, which were still in effect to this day. The group is allegedly still run by Zerbe, which is now known as the Family International, but in 2010 it was abandoned into a small network of about 1,500 members across 80 countries. It's funny if you actually look up their website, it actually looks like it was designed in 2004. They claim that children are meant to be loved and cherished, worthy of respect and dignity. The irony of those statements on their own website, I'm sure, isn't lost on any of you as it wasn't on me. In reality, the religious cult is a lot like the others I've covered before. Same type of ideology, same claim of divine contact with God, same abuse to kids as well as older members, same claims that the world is going to end, gaslighting galore, the same arrogance and insanity that forms these groups and the countless victims it creates just never ends. So that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Please like, share and subscribe and all that good stuff as always. I didn't cover every single thing that happened throughout this period because it would have been quite an extensively long video. So if there's anything I missed or any interesting facts, please let me know in the comments down below. Or if there's anything that you learned that you found interesting, let me know in the comments below as always. But that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Peace out.